Thank you all. To lighten the mood just a little bit, I want to offer seconds in the back of the room. And we need to say goodbye to some of our poli-sci folks. We have visitors from the Department of Political Science at Michigan State University who are spending their day here at the Capitol, as Matt said at the beginning of our program. So we're going to see a little bit of an exodus. So we hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have benefited from being here today. We need you. And so get to work. All righty. Abby is going to take the mic around to you because we're filming this. And fortunately, some of you know that we replay this video on the west side of the state, but it's also available on YouTube. So if you've been with us for forums previous to this one, it's probably on YouTube. And this program will be there too because it's all about public education, awareness, and that's what that's there for. So do we have questions?
Hi, Linda Hoff with League of Women Voters of Michigan. I have a couple of questions, so I don't want to hog it, but one is probably mostly to you, Kelly, and that is, as you're doing, but to all of you, as you're doing your training around the state and your interventions, are you seeing a change in attitudes and perception? There's a huge difference, I understand this, but between like a rape victim and a trafficking victim, you know, for so long we've seen rape victims blamed for their situation. Are you seeing a shift in any of that? The other one is, Meredith, to you, are you seeing, how are you getting the young girls that you're getting at Vista Maria? What paths are they taking that you are receiving them? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll answer the first question. I think it really does take exposure to the issue before somebody has the opportunity to change their perception on the issue. But I'll find even during the course of the case, like I'll go in and there might be a judge who's like kind of, oh, this is just a prostitution case, and you know, they have that sort of attitude. But once you start going into it, you start peeling back those layers a little bit and explaining the context a little bit. It doesn't take long before there's a whole bunch of people in the room who are shaking their head saying, okay, I get it, I understand it. So, you know, we sort of have the opportunity to have, you know, one-on-one encounters with some people to develop the issues, but we need to have sort of broader outreach on what it is, what it looks like, how it happens, and as Jane mentioned, sort of dispelling some of those myths.
Okay.
In relation to the young ladies who come to us to Vista Maria, there actually we get referrals from the Department of Health and Human Services. Any youth throughout if it's a raid or so forth, or just a jury referral of any minor protocol, then Child Protective Services must be involved. And then therefore, the communication and process is set forth of what is the best environment, you know, for that child. And then we will get the call necessarily that she needs to be placed in residential treatment, and therefore we will begin our process as far as our admission process and begin our journey for healing.
Do you accept young men as well, Meredith?
We've gotten that request many times, but we primarily serve, we do for residential treatment all females, ages 11 to 17 for our residential treatment. And we do have adult services as far as our dorm-style apartments for 18 and over for our young women who need additional support.
Okay, thank you. Yes, over here, Abby. There's a question here. Thank you.
A few years ago in City Pulse, there was an article by Mark Inglot about prostitutes on Kalamazoo Street in Lansing. And that article was almost imprinted on me. I really did not know till I read it. And I want to ask you about a couple of points that he made. One was that the prostitutes would be raped. So along with their commercial activity, something else happens, and he didn't go into a lot of detail about that, but he did point out that they can't go to the police about it. And I'm wondering if there's anything that any of you have encountered around that question. And then the other point I want to bring up is that he said that at least some of the prostitutes have diagnosable post-traumatic stress syndrome, which certainly fits with the trauma-informed care discussion and so on that we've heard. And I happen to be on the board of the Clinton Evening Community Mental Health Authority. So I asked our then executive director, you know, are we doing anything? I mean, are you familiar with this or whatever? And his response surprised me. He said, even though the article had said that the condition of PTSD for the prostitutes could be worse than that condition for veterans, which seemed to me to be saying a lot, he said they may not be sick enough for us to serve them, which I found depressing. So I'm wondering if you have any experience or insights that might be relevant. Thank you.
So one of your questions is why these people could not go to the police. Jane, I believe we talked about that previous to the forum.
We did. First of all, if one goes to any city in the United States and say to your police department, where does prostitution exist on the streets in your city, they will show you where. Which always amazes me because that means that there's little or no attention. The issue of prostitution and human trafficking are two separate issues, even though there's often an intersection of both of them. And so the confusion exists as to whether or not one can be a willing participant in a commercial sexual act. And there is no doubt that there are many who are saying that they are prostitutes who indeed entered under a human trafficking situation. And for many complicated reasons they exist. So the fact remains that those are two separate issues. The second part of your question, however, is something that really is of interest to me because the trauma-informed is a very acute issue presently in human trafficking. We believe that almost all victims indeed suffer from this. And what we have found out is that we have stressed to our caretakers, to our first responders, that you must use those techniques in talking and interviewing. But what we realize is we have given them absolutely no tools. And what does that mean? Meredith is the chair from the task force of a trauma-informed toolbox because we have to give, again, very realistic and practical information to our first responders because they are the first to set up situations because victims do not talk about what their experiences have been. It is layer, Kelly mentioned the onion, it is layer upon layer upon layer that one really learns the tragedies and what they have gone through. So you've asked two very good questions, but they're very complex.
Mary, did you want to address that?
Yeah, just real quick. Definitely in relation to post-traumatic stress disorder, which is very real. And yes, I am kind of taken back from that comment actually in relation to that because of the victims will actually display those type of traumatic or trauma responses could be through self-inflicted violence, addiction, aggression, and so forth, which all of those things, I'm sorry, is to me is sick enough to be able to be treated, to have services available because that's how some of those aspects of PTSD do display in some victims. So I think it's something to go back to the table and continue to have that discussion because there are some things being missed.
Sheila, do health care providers have a toolbox that could transfer over to law enforcement or vice versa?
We have our basic toolbox, how to take care of the patients, how to address them, but time constraints in those fast-paced settings is what we're missing. That's why we collaborate with psych social workers, et cetera. We identified it, and that's their specialty, so especially in the acute setting.
It's difficult to identify post-stress or trauma syndrome in a 5-minute interview.
Correct.
Okay.
And what we do in these cases too is we encourage sort of anybody who might have an opportunity to be involved in these cases to do a local inventory, to pursue that collaboration, so that if you've got a law enforcement officer who gets the call at 3 o'clock in the morning, he already knows who his local trauma-informed, human trafficking specialty victim service provider is, so that they have the number, they can call the right person, and they're not going to have to go it alone, and vice versa. We encourage victim service providers to seek out their law enforcement to let them know, I'm here, and if it happens, I'm the person that you should call, because, again, you just can't do it alone. We need both parts of that equation in order to adequately address and respond to the needs of our victims.
That's the collaboration, right?
Yeah.
And
Hi, I'm Mary Engelman with the Michigan Women's Commission, and this has been one of our big issues, and so we've definitely been at the table collaborating with you guys. And one of the things I have a question about is it just seems like with the collaboration, the education, and the research, it all stems down to money. And, that's something that, the legislature really needs to kind of look at and really commit to. And without giving them hard numbers, how do we kind of do that? I know that Representative Love is in the room, and she and I really collaborated on this. This is one of her issues, and I know that Senator Emmons was instrumental. My question to you is, with the labor trafficking, which is that's a huge issue that we see, because Michigan has a lot of agricultural type of, we're an agricultural industry. How are we communicating with the immigrants to explain to them and to kind of educate them that they may be being human trafficked? That's one question. The other thing I believe is, we're talking, the kids are vulnerable from 11 to 17, 18 is like where that terrible stuff happens, and then they move into adulthood where they have all these habits and beliefs that are now a part of who they are. How are we reaching these young kids? Those are the things that keeps me up at night at the Women's Commission. How do we tell these girls and these boys that they matter, and how do we give them the tools to recognize these signs that they could potentially be trafficked? We even now have kids in high school, boys that are trafficking fellow students. So this is a huge thing, and it's happening not just in urban areas. It's happening in our neighborhoods. It's happening in the wealthy areas just as much as the unwealthy areas. So I don't know. It's really daunting and scary.
so your question's about really prevention,
Yes.
maybe through education of the most vulnerable.
Right. So, identified both through the commission, and actually the commission is working in partnership with another collaborator that I don't think has been mentioned yet, but Matt Opsmer is in the back for the Michigan State Police. They're part of the Joint Anti-Trafficking Task Force that focuses on the southeast portion of the state right now. I think that there's some hope that we might be able to go broader with that. But we're working on developing training for educators to be able to interact and intercede. We know that there was a labor trafficking case involving minors a few years ago in our state, but for an educator who recognized and identified what was happening, those minor victims would not have been rescued from their labor trafficking situation. And Jane, do you want to talk about the migrant aspect of things, the migrant labor?
Yeah, that's something that we are very close to in terms of working with labor organizations, and it is a very difficult thing. First of all, I do need to mention our neighbor down the road, 60 miles from here, called the University of Michigan, because they do have a very, very strong center in their law school who almost exclusively see labor trafficking victims. And Bridget Carr is the director of that. And because of the interns and the potential there, besides the full-time staff, they have committed. And the cases that they see more than any other are domestic servitude cases. 80% of their work is with labor victims. That penetration into labor work is very difficult because of language, because of culture, because of conditions that have just been difficult to come forward because of what the traffickers have set up for the ramifications if anybody gets involved. And we're talking about generations of family, or it may be third generation, but that still, if they talk, that there is trouble back in their home countries with families. Traffickers are very, very good at persuading their potential victims of what they are capable of doing, and in fact do. It's not just capability. So those are really important. The other one that I want to address is funding. Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force is not funded by anybody. We have existed totally on donations, totally. We have never had 1 penny from any governmental entity. And I don't even know how that's possible, because it's really tragic that in 10 years' time, and I say that because we were at Michigan State, so it's not very fair to say that there's no funding, because that was our home and they allowed us to exist, but there still was not funding for kinds of things that needed to be done. Certainly the curriculum development is ultra. We have examined over 100 curriculums around the United States, and most of them are not appropriate for high school. They're very sensational. They only talk about sex. They talk about the fact that somebody's going to grab them, take them away, and that is not how it is done. They talk about the issues of technology being ultra important in risk-taking. Well, you know what? Technology is here to stay, and for every positive there is a negative. But we have to recognize that technology is a powerful, positive tool, and that we have to learn how it is to use it. So I'm sorry to go on, but those are two or three really important points that I'm really glad that you asked about.
It's in the middle. And I believe the center at U of M is the only such center in a university, am I correct?
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Laurel. I'm with the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness, and I've been grappling with how to ask this question because it's a big question. But we know that there's a huge intersect between housing and homelessness, we've heard that today, and trafficking. The New York Times just put out an article this week saying that up to 40% of homeless youth who are women have been sex trafficked. And so I'm wondering if there is a vision for collaboration with homeless shelters, with housing advocates who may have some of that interaction, specifically with street outreach, to individuals who are on the street and are vulnerable in that way. What could that look like from your point of view? What is already happening from your experience? And just where should we go with that to try and address both of these huge, massive problems together and separately, however it best works?
That's a great study that just came out, and actually the issue of homelessness really has filtered in through LGBTQ, and that is an issue we had not looked at until recently and become aware of, and something that is absolutely vital because we're talking about kids that are really surviving, and the reason for the exploitation of the sex is for survival. So that partnership, that collaboration is ultra important. I totally agree with you. It has every component that, again, expresses what trafficking is all about, that unknown population.
And I think the second part of that question, too, is how do you begin to approach that? And part of that is through awareness, making the folks who are dealing with the homeless population aware of the realities of human trafficking. Again, not what you see in a movie or how it's depicted on TV, but how it can actually look and occur, and having people being aware of that, then they can employ the appropriate sensitivities and recognition to be able to perhaps get somebody some additional help if they recognize that they may have been trafficked or particularly vulnerable to trafficking or are talking about somebody who's attempting to exploit them.
So there are some protocols, but within the different professions. So there's some collaboration going on, but it's not a set protocol. It seems like it's an
There's not a
instinct.
one-size-fits-all protocol, because how trafficking interacts or intersects with any number of the disciplines involved is going to be different. So DHHS actually began the first protocol, I think, back in 2012, and just updated it to address the issues in the law. But they've already got a bunch of protocols, so having a protocol for them seemed like the right thing to do. I know that Sheila and there's a bunch of other medical professionals looking at developing protocols so that medical professionals have, some quick, easy steps in front of them of, if I have this, what do I do about it, kind of thing. But it really is going to depend upon each sort of discipline or profession looking at how the issue impacts them, where they have the opportunity to make an impact on the issue, either with victims, recognition, services, whatever the case may be, and then sort of developing, across each discipline the best steps or practices for them to be able to address the issue, any one of the number of issues that we've talked about.
The protocols too is, there's certain questions you have to ask patients when they come in. You feel safe in this environment? Are you a possible victim of domestic violence? And now we are looking at the policies and for that and expanded an electronic record is, are you a possible victim of human trafficking? But those terminology, the trafficker might not know, but you can add comments that say they denied it, but based on what they said, potentially they could be at risk. So they're looking at that, which is a big step.
I have a question here.
Hi, Margaret Grima from the Diocese of Lansing. I have heard that a big percentage of the children that are trafficked comes through the foster care system. Is that true, and how can we change, or what are the avenues that we can do to make sure that the children that end in foster care do not end up getting back on the streets and then being trafficked?
I would like to address that one, because that is one, Margaret, that we have said for a long time, that the vulnerability of foster care. But I'm not sure that we're not skimming, and we have got to stop skimming. The issue is that no one enters foster care to do a vacation. One enters foster care because something very, very wrong has happened. And it is not an incident, it is a culmination of kinds of things. So we enter the system that somehow we have great expectations, but we really don't do a lot of care about our foster care system. And I say that because we don't train workers on human trafficking. We don't train foster care parents on human trafficking. And that seems to me just a sensible kind of thing. What is the investment? If we talk about public policy in this state, we ought to examine public policy not as a blame factor on foster care, but what is it that we can do to change and effectively look at how to care for kids. We really have to go about this victim-centered. We ignore it often, not because we consciously want to, but it just happens. So the question that you're bearing as we look at it is the same with whether we address it. We have not really talked about the issue this day because of about sexual abuse, which is, if we look at the history of human trafficking victims, the numbers are extremely high, that in their young years they were sexually exploited. And therefore, what do we do when that exploitation takes place at 3, 4, 6, 8, 10? We don't deal well with it as a society. So we need to look at those issues too. So it's time to stop skimming, and it's time to say we need to take on some issues and make some progress in the state.
And just to expand upon that too, and I'm not an expert, our experts are sitting over at the table over there, but I know that in the past couple of years, the federal government has enacted new regulations that require some additional reporting, additional monitoring of foster care youth within our care to be able to make a better effort at identifying those who are vulnerable or could have potentially been exploited in instances where they were away from care.
Thank you, Chris. I was going to mention the exact same thing. I'm glad that you said that. And I think it's also it's opportunities, because we do have phenomenal foster parents that are actually in the community, and we need more. And the training for the foster families, because the children can go into the community. And also, too, it's the welcoming of the community, that community engagement, especially it's a new home. And you have to think about that. It kind of goes hand in hand there. It's not just one person. There's a whole entity that's coming in. And how do you be able to really welcome that child to be part of that community? Because that child also has siblings, connection, other family members who may not know the child has been missing for so long, that have this re-engagement and so forth. So it is a very complex, issue surrounding that. But we have some great folks who really understand the nature of what human trafficking is and providing care ultimately, that I think that we got possibilities before us. We really do.
Thank you. Who are our experts? Let's call out our experts here.
Yeah, I'll do it. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got our folks over here at the table from DHHS.
Yes.
We've got Robert Harvey, who's the somewhat newly appointed human trafficking coordinator, I believe. Analyst. Well, essentially he coordinates. And then also Janet, I don't remember, Kaylee, who's also with DHHS but involved in foster care specifically, and some of that reporting with regard to human trafficking. So.
And this
And
is
Kim
Ken
Marks.
Marks, who's our housing specialist.
Well, this is,
Connected
it's,
with HYR contracts and outreach.
it adds confidence that we have experts like you who are assigned to this. And so thank you for your work. And I want to thank the people who are on our panel today. This has just been a heart-wrenching topic for me. Out of all the forums I've done over several years, this is one that's weighed heavy on me. And I just so appreciate their work and their sticking with it and their courage and really addressing this issue. But before I let them off the hook, I'm going to let them have the last word and perhaps talk specifically about your role in moving forward on diminishing the crime of human trafficking. Jane?
I would offer a couple of things. First of all, it's time to go to your police department and say, have you guys been trained, police chief? Is there anything we can do to assist in that regard? We know that there's some training that is free that we can bring them, because probably close to 60% of police officers in Michigan are yet not trained. We have compulsory, mandatory training for social workers now, as well as hospital medical care, and that's wonderful. The second thing is form discussion groups. We have 9 community regional task forces from the task force. It has to be solved at the community level. And you know what? There's something going on in the United States right now. Groups of 5 and 10 who are meeting about issues within their community they want to change. That's a great model for that you just meet and you start talking about the issue. For instance, if you have strip clubs and massage parlors, are there health conditions? You know, it's time to put some conditions on you. They're closed at 9 o'clock at night. Why? Because people shouldn't be getting massages at 3 o'clock in the morning unless you're doing something else you shouldn't be doing. I mean, you have to look at your community, do an inventory of what is there. Your nail salons, are people moving in and out? Are there beds that are there? You don't sleep at where you work, do you? I don't. Well, I guess I do. I guess I do. The other thing is the Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force. We have a Facebook page that every day there are new kinds of articles. The other thing is, Sheila, I was at your place at Henry Ford Hospital Thursday. And I keep saying I'm not going to be surprised anymore. I'm not going to be surprised anymore. But you know what? I'm surprised all the time. I'm talking to speech pathologists, and we're talking about, what do you think is happening here at Henry Ford? And I get home that night, and there's an article in the paper, in the New York Times, that a physician who works in the emergency room at Henry Ford has been doing cutting in terms of young girls, which is a cultural kind of thing in other countries, forbidden in other countries, but we have never had, to our knowledge, cases in the United States. And it was like, but you know what? That's another connection with worth and the worth of girls. And that the group that I just was with and talked, and believe me, Henry Ford has absolutely no knowledge and information that this was going on. Please don't. It was supposedly was someplace else. But the point is, the physician was there. There were young kids coming in where she worked. There were probably telephone calls. There were probably information. And so the awareness that we have is unbelievable. And I hope that you know in your heart that you have probably witnessed the issues of human trafficking in your communities.
Wow, I can't say anything about Henry Ford now.
No, it's a great, it's an absolute.
It could be anywhere. It could be
Yeah.
Just to tell you, I think the main thing that, and we've come a long way. When I first came to that first meeting, I went, oh my gosh. So we've come a long way. We have a longer way to go. I think with the new rules for healthcare providers to be educated in trafficking as of March of 2017 to have their license renewed is outstanding. But when we were looking at the policies, well, some of the administration said we just have to do nursing. And I go, no, you don't. You've got to do housekeeping. You have to do the security. Anybody that works on that hospital environment needs to be educated. And that light bulb just went off again. And I go, think about that. And I think part of my passion, too, is, and I talked to Jane, too, is about the school systems. I'm sorry, you got to get that population, and maybe those are too big, but start out small, like your youth groups in the churches and that. And I've spoken in our church before, and I'm just basically, sex, not sex trafficking, but just about letting kids talk about what they want. And they feel comfortable. They're going to tell you everything, but they have to make sure either the priest or the minister is not around. And I said, told them, you're going to be there. They're going to listen. They're going to talk. But that's a perfect opportunity. Make them feel safe to talk about it because they don't know if it's normal or not normal, what's acceptable, what isn't. So I think the idea is that get to the school systems, the healthcare, the colleges, and it is part of their curriculum. You can, I can see that happening, in almost all of the universities, in, at least in Michigan. I can see it coming. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Just real quick, I think in order to support the avenue of prevention, just what Sheila has stated, not being afraid to have these conversations with our young people. As Jane mentioned, the technology is here to stay, but how we safely use the technology, because sometimes technology can be a safe haven and communicate to the right folks. I need help, if you think about it. So how do we best utilize the technology in that way? And then also, too, in relation to treatment is supporting the local victim service providers in your community through mentorship, tutoring, just volunteering the time. That's essential. The one thing the kids I know, they're seeking and they develop a relationship with the traffickers because they don't have anyone else productive to develop relationships with. So we have to be those folks. So really sharing your time and efforts with local victim service providers will be essential in how you can help.
And somebody should tell everyone here about the Michigan Abolition Project. There is a Lansing chapter. So if we're being invited to be engaged, someone should say that there's already a group of that nature, which is community-based.
Well, yeah, there's actually dozens of groups, and it wouldn't necessarily be fair to, I think, point out one of the many fantastic victim services groups that are, they're often all part of the human trafficking task force itself. But there are, again, it goes to, that idea of seeking out what's in your community that's right for you, that either has the right approach or information for you to be able to take part in, to do your part. And I guess I would just sort of, in summation say that, Jane started the task force probably almost 10 years ago, right? And I've been working on the issue for about 6 years. And one thing that I think that we tend to see with, issues that get a lot of attention is that the attention seems to fade away after some period of time. I have to say that I'm somewhat pleasantly surprised that it seems that the interest just keeps growing rather than fizzling out. And I would sort of encourage everybody to take advantage of the fact that the interest in this issue continues to grow. So we still have a lot of room and opportunity to make great strides to be able to do all that we can to tackle the issue. Each of us in the way that's appropriate for us to do. So.
Excellent, thank you. We can put a link to the latest report from the task force on our website, and then people often go to those reports for learning about expertise and groups that were mentioned earlier. So the representatives on the task force can be found in that publication. Fair enough? We'll also put the presentations on the website so that you'll have those to share with your colleagues and your community groups. Okay. And then I also mentioned that we're filming this so that you can share the information. So there's the seed for your community discussion. Right, Jane?
Yeah.
All right. Just a quick reminder that on May 31st, we'll have a forum on immigration reform or immigration policies and the impact that they may or may not have on the state of Michigan. For now, could you please extend a thank you to our panelists?